counter some of the most challenging security threats we face. The President of the United States applauded the agreement. I quote him directly, "It is a clear demonstration that through diplomacy and partnership, countries can overcome long-standing historical challenges to reach peaceful and mutually beneficial outcomes." Several other countries and organisations, including India, the African Union, the UN Secretary-General and others, have welcomed and applauded this historic political agreement. Our primary goal throughout these negotiations, which started over 2 years ago under the previous government, was to protect the joint UK-US military base on Diego Garcia. There will be clear commitment in the treaty to robust security arrangements, including arrangements preventing the presence of foreign security forces on the outer islands so that the base can continue to operate securely and effectively. The operation of the base will continue unchanged, with strong protections from malign influence. For the first time in 50 years, the base will be undisputed and legally secure. Continued uncertainty would be a gift to our adversaries. This is why the agreement has been welcomed by all parts of the US system and other critical regional security partners. Agreeing the deal now on our terms meant that we were able to secure strong protections that will allow the base to operate as it has done. We look forward to engaging with the upcoming US administration on this and many other aspects of the UK-US special relationship. Mr. Speaker, finally, you can be reassured that the long-term protection of the base on Diego Garcia has been the shared UK and US priority throughout. This agreement secures its future. We would not have signed off on an agreement that compromised any of our security interests or those of the US and our allies and partners.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question. At a time when we face the most challenging military threats for years, surely our top priority should be to preserve the strongest possible US-UK relations, given this is so vital to our national security. And yet, it appears that the government is seeking to agree a deal surrendering the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands before President Trump is formally in post. However, we know the new US administration are concerned about the government's deal because presumptive nominee US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that the deal, and I quote, poses a serious threat to US national security interests, and also suggested, and I quote further, that it would provide an opportunity for Communist China to gain valuable intelligence on this US naval support facility. So let's be clear, Mr. Speaker, our military base on Diego Garcia is a vital strategic asset for the UK and the Indian Ocean and critical to our presence and posture in the Indo-Pacific region. In particular, it is an especially important base for the United States, and we believe that anything that damages their defence posture, particularly in relation to China, also undermines our national security. And now we understand that the new Mauritius government has launched a review of the deal, Mr. Speaker. So can I therefore ask the Minister to confirm if it really is the case that their policy is to try and rush through their Chagos deal before President Trump's inauguration? Does he not see how that would be hugely disrespectful to the new administration and President Trump's democratic mandate? But specifically, given we now know that it's common for the MOD to state the cost of overseas bases, will he be transparent and finally tell us how much we're going to have to pay to rent back the vital military base we currently own? And finally, Mr. Speaker, whilst we would prefer the government to cancel the whole deal, at the very least, will he pause any further ratification until the new US administration is in place and the Mauritius government have concluded their review?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions and for his strong focus on this. I think he has a bit of amnesia from when his government that he served of started these negotiations, held 11 rounds of these negotiations. It took a Labour government to conclude the negotiations, but we have done so in the best interest of our national security and securing the national security concerns of our closest allies. It would not have been possible to secure a deal and the support of the United States if all parts of the US security apparatus were not in support of this deal. As a former defence minister, he will know that to be true regardless of the politics he must play today. He asked two quick questions. We intend to continue our dialogue with both the new Mauritian government and with our friends in the United States. He will be aware, of course, that it is illegal under US law for us to trade directly with the new administration until they come in place, but we will continue to have dialogue with our our US and Mauritian friends. And when it comes to costs, I'm surprised that he's asking this question as a former defence minister. He will know that it's quite usual for us to declare operating and running costs of overseas bases, but it would compromise our operational security and the long-term relationships if we were to declare the government-to-government payments for overseas bases. But we have declared the operational running costs of our overseas bases. We'll continue to do so in relation to parliamentary questions, but detailing that security payment for government-to-government interactions is not something that this government does. It wasn't something that his government did either.
Yeah. Chair of the Select Committee, Tamji Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The UK-US base on Diego Garcia is of great significance in terms of defence, as well as in terms of our strategic international significance. And it's clear that steps must be taken to ensure its legal status is secure in the future. And of course, the voice of the Chagosians must be central within any future arrangement. However, it has been reported that President-elect Trump has reservations with the proposed treaty, and the newly elected Mauritius Prime Minister Ram Ghulam has ordered a review into the treaty. So can the Minister advise what further representations have been made to both of our partners to ensure that we have the support of our international partners?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He's absolutely right. The continuing operation of Diego Garcia is in UK and US national security interests, which is why this deal secures that operation. I congratulate Dr. Ramagoolan on his election. In a letter to the Prime Minister on the 15th of November, he noted his commitment to completing the negotiations. Jonathan Powell was in Mauritius this week to start that process.
Callum Millard, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We and all others who care about the resolution of this issue are deeply disappointed in the way we've been led to this point. 11 rounds of negotiations under the Conservatives and more under the new government. Just 4 weeks ago, the Foreign Secretary presented his deal to the House. Now, the new President-elect and the new Prime Minister of Mauritius are expressing doubts. Is it not striking and shocking that this has unravelled so quickly? Does the Minister agree with me that whatever happens next, it's vital that the voices of the Chagosians are finally injected into this process and that they are able to fulfil their right of self-determination? Whatever lies ahead in these talks, we on these benches have strongly argued that all treaties should come before the House before signing. I believe members of the opposition, or the now government bench, including 2 sitting there today, supported this in the past. So will the Minister commit to allowing meaningful opportunities for parliamentarians to examine the detailed proposals, including necessary assurances on elements of the deal relating to our national security, before anything is signed?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. We will be following the normal process in treaty ratification. That is, after signature, it will come before this House with details given to colleagues able to have full parliamentary scrutiny, as would be expected as part of the normal process. It's right he raises the Chagosians, and my colleague who sits next to me here, the Minister, has been meeting with Chagosian communities in the UK. He will continue to meet with Chagosian communities, and this government deeply regrets the way that they were treated and removed from the islands originally, which is one of the reasons why we've made such an important part of the future for the islands as part of the relationship with the Chagosians that the Foreign Secretary has outlined to the House previously.
Mark Siebert.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister confirm that the vital UK-US base on Diego Garcia, that its operations will continue completely unaffected by the terms of this deal? And separately, Mr. Speaker, will he also confirm that our commitment to the Falkland Islands, to Gibraltar, and the rights of the people there to self-determine remain completely unaffected by this deal?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and let me say, as the First Minister from the new government to visit the Falklands, I was able to say very clearly that the Falkland Islands are British for as long as they would like to be. That was a message that I gave to the Gibraltarians, that Gibraltar is British for as long as the people of Gibraltar want to be, and I can confirm to the honourable gentleman that this deal secures the future of the UK-US base on Diego Garcia, something that our US allies have supported.
Sir Julia Lewis.
Which is more important for Britain's vital security, to have the approval of the outgoing American president or the approval of the incoming one? And what is there to prevent China, with Mauritius's agreement, putting listening outposts on other islands that could compromise the security of Diego Garcia?
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his questions there. There are very specific arrangements in the treaty that prevent any foreign power putting security apparatus, security forces on any of the outgoing islands. He'll be able to see that when the treaty becomes for this House. In relation to support from the United States, we would not have signed an agreement if it weren't being supported by our US friends. This deal secures the operation of the UK-US base on Diego Garcia well into the next century, and I expect that when everyone look at the detail of the deal, they'll be backing it as well.
Peter Lamb.
Mr. Speaker, Chagos belongs to the Chagosians. A quarter of the global population of Chagos lives within my constituency. I'm aware of statements made by the ministers they have met with representatives of the Chagosian community. I do not know which representatives those are, but I know of representatives within my constituency who have not yet been consulted. Will the minister agree that before any further dialogue is taking place, that they will engage with the community representatives fully within my constituency?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. My colleague, the Foreign Office Minister beside me, has met with a range of representatives from the Chagosian community and will continue to do so as this process continues. I know that he would welcome a conversation with the honourable gentleman to make sure that dialogue is as complete as it can be.
Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, can I ask, what's the rush? Why is the honourable gentleman in such a hurry to get this done? Can I suggest it would be to the government's advantage, if their case is so strong, that they allow this House to debate the agreed text in public before it is signed? And can I also suggest that it stretches incredulity for him to tell the House there have been no discussions at all with the incoming administration? Can he at least tell the House what informal dialogue there is with the incoming American administration about what their view really is, and can he report that to the House, please?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. As a long-standing member of this House, he'll be familiar with how treaties are debated and agreed by this House. After signature, they will come forward for ratification. This process was started a number of years ago by the government that he supported at the time. 11 rounds of negotiation have taken place. We've secured a deal that is in support of the UK and US base on Diego Garcia that will continue its operation well into the next century. When he and others see the detail of that deal, I'm certain people will back it.
Dave Dougal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's hard to imagine anything from that dispatch box over the last 5 months that survived contact with reality. And this is no different. Because in the tripartite relationship between the United States, the United Kingdom and Mauritius, 2 of those partners now have doubts about this arrangement. So what is the unseemly rush about? Because in the tension between national security and the human rights of the Chagosians, this government, as usual, has managed to reconcile neither. Very good.
Well, I'm not certain the SNP record on national security really gives him the platform that he's pretending to on this one here. However, what I will say to him, because I recognise that actually he's trying to make a serious point around this deal, is that when this deal is signed, it will come before the House in the usual way. That will allow parliamentarians of all parties to look at the detail of the deal and to take a judgment, and the House will vote in the usual way, as it will do on other treaties.
So Desmond Swain.
What is it in particular that the new regime in Mauritius has doubts about? It's that they want more money, isn't it?
Well, I thank the gentleman for his question. It's quite normal, I think, for any new government to look again at a deal signed by their immediate predecessors. But the reason I say that is when they look at the deal, the detail of this deal will be convincing, just as it will be for our US friends, because it's a deal backed by the entirety of the US security apparatus that secures the future operation of this UK-US base well into the future, dealing with the uncertainty that existed around that base up until the point of this deal being made. I'm certain he will back the deal, hopefully, when the details come before the House. Let's see.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The presentation of what the American administration believes is a fantasy. Joe Biden is going. In fact, many think he's gone already. I have been contacted by very senior officials and advisers from the incoming Republican administration, and every single one of them is appalled at this deal. They know the leasehold agreement will not survive, just as the deal with China over Hong Kong didn't survive. Hasn't the time come for the government to admit this is a rotten deal for the UK, a rotten deal for America, and an even worse deal for the Chagosians? And if you care so much about the sovereignty of the Falklands being in the hands of the Falkland Islanders, why not have a referendum of the Chagosians and ask them to settle who should have sovereignty over those islands?
Yeah. Well, as someone who's been in the Falklands recently, let me say that whipping up uncertainty of the future of the Falklands is not helpful for the security of the Falkland Islanders. Let's be absolutely clear. The Falklands are British for as long as the people of the Falkland Islands want to be British. When it comes to this deal, I'm certain that when the detail of the deal has been put before this House and before our US friends and other allies, they will see that the deal secures not only the future of the UK-US base, something that is not the case until this deal was signed, but secures it well into the next century, where he and I will no longer be in this place, but the UK-US base will be on Diego Garcia, still operating, securing our national interests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know in this House how the People's Republic of China have been able to use commercial vessels, including fishing vessels, in order to be able to impinge on the way we operate. Can the Minister set out to the House how large an exclusion zone there is going to be around Diego Garcia to make sure that our interests and US interests are properly protected?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his serious question and the way he presented it. It is important that we have certainty about the security future relationship. That's why the treaty sets out very clearly security arrangements for the outer islands, which will prevent foreign nations from putting security forces or security apparatus on those islands. The full details will be in the treaty. But I think it is important to note that Mauritius was one of only 2 African countries that didn't join the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Maintaining a strong relationship with them, especially in more contested times, is absolutely vital. That's what this deal helps to deliver.
Dr. Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister says that the US administration, outgoing Biden administration, is very keen on this deal, which may or may not be the case, but the British public plainly are not, and for very good reason, and see the payment of a dowry to Mauritius as rubbing salt into the wound. If the Minister isn't prepared to comment on the quantum that he has in mind, can he at least explain the structure of the costings that he is applying in order to come to the figure that he wishes to give Mauritius for taking on these islands?
I thank the former minister for his question. As someone who served in the department that I now serve in, he will know that it is very normal to reveal the operating costs for overseas bases, but we do not, we did not reveal the government-to-government payments. That's standard procedure for his government and every government before. It remains the policy of this government, but this deal secures the future of the UK-US base, and I'm hopeful when the details come out, he will be able to understand why this secures it for so long, and hopefully he'll be able to back it.
Many more things. Sir John Whittingham.
The Minister has said that he's not willing to give details of the financial arrangement, although he will be aware that the Mauritian Prime Minister has described the deal as a sellout. Can he at least give an assurance that the government will not commit to giving yet more money in order to get this deal through before the new US administration arrives in January?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. We think this is a good deal, and we're certain that when the details come out, then others will be able to take their judgment, but I think they will conclude it's a good deal. It secures the future of the UK-US base on Diego Garcia, which was the overriding objective when his party was in power, and they set out that because this secures the future of that base. We're glad that we have done so well into the next century, and that's an important step for UK and US national security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister set out how he intends to implement safeguards against China establishing military capabilities and surveillance capacity in the British Indian Ocean territories?
That's an important question. It's one that I mentioned a few answers ago. But just to reassure the honourable gentleman that there will be safeguards in the treaty that detail that no foreign security forces will be able to set up on the outer islands, providing that security perimeter around Diego Garcia that we have sought and our US allies sought. That is why this is a good deal, because it secures not only the future of the operation of the base, but it also secures the future security around the base. And I'm hopeful when the details comes out, he'll be able to see that for himself.
Alistair.
Return to a question asked but not answered this afternoon. If the Mauritian government's review demands more money, will the government pay up in order to save face?
I'm confident this is a good deal, and I think the Mauritian government will be looking at the deal that has been signed, and they will see it as a good deal. And our US friends know it's a good deal currently, and anyone looking at this deal in the future will see it as a good deal. It's a good deal because it achieves our #1 objective of securing the UK-US base on Diego Garcia well into the next century.
Charlie Chagos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, alluded to the presumptive nominee Marco Rubio's comments, saying that this deal represents a serious threat to US national security. Does the Minister agree?
What I can say to the honourable gentleman is that all the representatives of the US security apparatus who have seen the detail of the deal back the deal. It is something that secures the future of the base. It allayed the US fears around the future of the base. And it's important to say, because there has been some barking from the front bench in relation to this, is the current situation with Diego Garcia is that base is not secure for the long term. There are questions over its long-term sovereignty. There is people building support against our sovereignty claim. This deal secures the long-term operation of that base well into the next century.
Jim Shan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Having been one of those who, along with many others in this House, have vehemently opposed the ceding of Chagos Islands without even consultation to the residents, and having stood in solidarity with those who opposed this cessation, I'm anxious to ensure that the Americans are determined to take control. In turn, that we must offer support to them in this, and that we allow those residents who consider themselves British to be a part of this equation. And what steps has the FCDO taken to ensure that the US are aware of the strength of feeling opposing this decision by those from the Chagos Islands? Thank you very much.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. It's a serious one, and that's the reason why this deal not only allows the settling of some of the outer islands by the Chagosian communities, but it also allows visits to Diego Garcia for the Chagosian communities who were removed in a way that this government so deeply regrets in the past. I think the detail of this deal is good to secure our national security, US national security, but also makes important steps to recognising the pain that was suffered by Chagosian communities and take steps to remedy those.
That completes that urgent question. From bench turning over. We now come to the next urgent question. Murray Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beg to leave to ask the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs if he will make a statement on the situation in Bangladesh and recent attacks on the Hindu community there.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The UK has a long-standing commitment to the protection of human rights. The UK champions freedom of religion or belief for all, and no one should live in fear because of what they do or do not believe in. We're working to uphold the right to freedom of religion or belief through our position at the UN, G7 and other multilateral fora, and in our important bilateral work. And just last month, as he is aware, I visited Bangladesh and as part of the programme met with the Chief Advisor, Professor Dr. Yunus, and Foreign Affairs Advisor Tawhid Hossain. During the meeting with Chief Advisor Yunus, I was able to discuss the full range of bilateral issues, including the importance of protecting religious minorities in Bangladesh. The UK government supports freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression in Bangladesh through both our political advocacy and development programme funding. We're providing up to $27 million from March 23 to February 28 under the Bangladesh Collaborative, Accountable and Peaceful Politics programme for protecting civic and political space, and specifically on the question of the Hindu community in Bangladesh. I was able to be given reassurances from the government, the interim government there, that in the lead up to Durga Puja, which is the national festival, that support was available for minority communities in Bangladesh. We were pleased to see the establishment of a special policing unit which was active in protecting mondaps, which is the Hindu worship sites, as I'm sure he's aware. The UK government will continue to monitor the situation, including making representations from this House and engage with the interim government of Bangladesh on the importance of freedom of religion or belief, specifically as it affects the Hindu community.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for allowing this urgent question. Since the fall of the previous government in August of this year, Bangladesh has seen more than 2,000 incidents of violence, most of which have been targeted against the minority Hindu community. Hindus make up less than 10% of the Bangladesh population, and my honourable friend will be aware that anti-Hindu violence has been a recurrent event in the country, and indeed the Jamaat-e-Islami party was earlier this year banned after riots in which 200 people were killed. But whilst Bangladesh no longer has the secular constitution of 1971 and became an Islamic state in 1988, there are nonetheless supposed to be protections for minority religions under Articles 28, 39 and others of the Constitution. These appear not to be being enforced, and there are reports of police and armies standing by as more than 20 places of minority Hindu and Sufi worship were vandalised and their worshippers attacked. On Friday, this came to a head when extremist groups from the Jamaat-e-Islami party attacked 2 Hindu temples in Chittagong and conducted a campaign of orchestrated violence against the Hindu population. A leading Hindu monk, Chinmoy Krishna Das, who is a former leader of the ISKCON Krishna consciousness movement, has been arrested. ISKCON is a worldwide branch of modern Hinduism with its UK headquarters at Bhaktivedanta Manor in Bushey, many of whose worshippers live in my own constituency of Brent West and the surrounding areas of northwest London. People are concerned that whilst he was engaged in exclusively peaceful protest, he has been denied due process, charged with sedition and refused bail. Yet none of the individuals who attacked the temples has been apprehended or charged. On Saturday, the senior Bangladeshi journalist Muni Saha was taken into police custody following an attack on her car by a large mob in Dhaka and only released under the provisions of the Criminal Code. The situation is clearly on a knife edge, and with such large diaspora populations in the UK and with large Hindu communities with strong links to the community in Bangladesh, I'd ask my honourable friend what more she can do to have discussions with the Bangladeshi government to ensure that, and with other partners in the region, to ensure that tensions are lowered, the rule of law put into effect, and calm and order restored.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member is quite right to raise these concerns. And our High Commission based in Dhaka is discussing in detail with the interim government of Bangladesh how to verify the number of any incidents or attacks against communities or indeed small businesses, where there have been reports of attacks on small businesses, to record those and to take remedial action and indeed to work on prevention. And that is why in the week that we visited, we were very pleased to hear that this special policing unit had been set up. We stand ready to offer advice on law and order, but know that this is part of the roadmap towards a more stable Bangladesh. We are aware of the statement of concern from the Indian government following the arrest of Chinmoy Krishna Das, a well-known Hindu leader, on sedition charges, and the UK FCDO desk is closely monitoring those developments.
Now come to the Secretary of State, Prince Patel.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for this UQ. It's an important subject, and he's also raised the arrest of the ISKCON leader, and it's a place of worship I too am very familiar with, near his constituency. But, Mr. Speaker, these are deep and long-standing ties between our two countries, and the Minister herself is right to point out that even though she's visited Bangladesh recently, as my right honourable friend, the member opposite, has said, the degree of escalation in the violence is deeply, deeply concerning. And what we are witnessing now is just uncontrolled violence in many quarters. And we are now watching with horror and shock as further violence is spread in Bangladesh. And all our thoughts in this House are most definitely with the diaspora community here and those who are affected in Bangladesh. These are deeply disturbing reports. The Minister herself mentioned the deadly attacks and the violence that took place during what is an auspicious period, the Durga Puja festival in 2021. So given the current instability in Bangladesh and since the departure of the former Prime Minister in August, this is a moment of deep concern. Many governments are condemning the violence and calling for peace and law and order to be restored. So I welcome the comments from the Minister, but I must emphasise that all efforts must be taken now. We have a religious leader who has now been arrested. We need to know effectively what is being done to secure his release, due process in particular. But at the same time, can the Minister give details of the government's engagement with the government on this particular matter? What discussions have taken place? And have we been robust in pursuing the right to protect life, the prevention of violence and persecution, and importantly, tolerance for religious belief? What efforts has the government undertaken to build upon the last government's work to promote freedom of religion and belief in Bangladesh? And can the Minister say what discussions are taking place with other international partners to help restore this kind of stability that we desperately need to see in Bangladesh?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The protests following the July and August student-led events were deeply troubling, and of course led to the fall of the government there. And the opposition spokesperson is quite correct in emphasising the nature of these worrying protests. And our constituents are concerned, which is why the member for Brent has brought this important question here today. And these do include reported cases of retaliatory attacks against allies of the former regime, including Hindu minority. And some of these attacks are allegedly politically motivated and are of concern. And that's why I had it at the top of my agenda when I met with Professor Dr. Yunus. And that's why the effort was made to set up this particular policing unit. And of course, our High Commission is active more than any other that I could see when I was there in guiding, in helping, in supporting a peaceful transition to a new government, elections eventually, and indeed to a harmonious future. And anywhere in the world where freedom of religion or belief is at risk, there we will be standing up for the rights of minority groups.
Laura Kirksmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many constituents in Aylesbury have raised these concerns about the safety of Hindus in Bangladesh, and they've shown me extremely concerning social media content containing threats to Hindus to leave the country or face extermination. Does the Minister agree that this is unacceptable, and can the Minister outline what representations she has made to the government of Bangladesh to ensure that those who are inciting and perpetrating this violence are held to account?
I thank the Honourable Lady, and she's doing excellent work representing her constituents who are concerned about these acts of violence. And I want to impress upon her that the UK was one of the first ministerial support to arrive in Dhaka and to speak with the Chief Advisor, Professor Yunus, and to be vocal in support of minorities.
Monica Harding, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We share the concerns from across this House regarding these attacks. And I note that the Minister has spoken to her Bangladeshi counterparts and urged her to continue. The most recent Foreign Office Human Rights and Democracy report lists Bangladesh as a human rights priority and highlights reports of harassment, particularly towards Hindu minorities, often incited online. That report recognises that UK funding through civil society organisations supported freedom of religion or belief and community mediation processes. Can the Minister update us on the progress being made using UK funding to combat religious discrimination in Bangladesh? Does this funding risk being another casualty of the latest ODA cuts? And will the government support our call for an ambassador-level champion of freedom of religion and belief so that the UK can do more to ensure that the rights of Hindus and all religious minorities are protected and upheld?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her suggestions for the Government, and I can confirm that the Deputy Prime Minister said in Parliament on the 20th of November that the envoy appointments are under ministerial consideration and will be decided upon in due course. So she will hear presently about the freedom of religion or belief representative. But could I also explain to her that regardless of any ministerial visit, the treatment of minorities will always be uppermost on our agenda with the government which we're visiting. And specifically on her question regarding funding, we're providing up to 27 million from March 2023 to February 2028 under the Bangladesh Collaborative, Accountable and Peaceful Politics Programme for protecting civic and political space, fostering collaboration, reducing corruption and mitigating tensions that lead to violence, which is the sort of programme that we have where a country is a human rights concerned country.
Dr. Rupa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to my friend and neighbour from Brent for raising these very important issues. We must be vigilant against all attacks on minorities, be they Buddhists, Christians and Hindus in Bangladesh. Would she agree with me that since that country's formation in 1971, these kind of communal tensions are sadly not new? Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have sent me a list of different flashpoint events. Between 1974 and 2001, the Hindu population in Bangladesh decreased from 13.5% to 8.5%. So this is not a new phenomenon. We must be vigilant. But can I caution her that there may be, after a regime collapsed, after the murder of 800 students in the summer, there may be some people who may seek to exploit these tensions. We need to stamp on it hard. And can she also assure us that we're doing all we can to transition that country to democracy in what people are calling Bangladesh 2.0?
I thank the Honourable Lady, who is a champion of human rights in this House, and I thank her for her particular interest in Bangladesh. And
right, Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my constituency neighbour and thank you for granting the urgent question. It's sad that the Minister has to come to answer an urgent question when asked last Thursday for a statement on the floor of the House on this particular issue. At the moment, we've got a position whereby Hindus are suffering with their houses being burnt, the businesses being ransacked, priests being arrested, and I understand 2 further were arrested over the weekend, and 63 monks were denied access to the country. So the clear issue here is an attempt at ethnic cleansing of Hindus from Bangladesh. So will the Minister come out and outright condemn this violence against Hindus, and not just have words of piety, but actually absolute condemnation for what's going on, where we have a position where religious minorities are being deliberately persecuted because of their religion?
Minister.
thank you, Mr. Speaker, and he must rest assured that it was at the top of my agenda with Dr. Yunus, who is the interim government leader there, and it was very much at the forefront of our discussion. And in terms of other similar nations, we were there first ministerial visit, and it was absolutely top of the list. And there can be nothing like a face-to-face with the person in charge to underline the importance of freedom of religion or belief, and in this case specifically attacks against the minority Hindu community.
Paula Barker.
Speaker, may I congratulate my honourable friend on securing this important UQ today. I represent a diverse community across my Liverpool-Wavertree constituency. Both Muslims and Hindus alike in Liverpool have made representations to me over the growing sectarian violence, the slide to extremism, and particularly the persecution of the Hindu minority. The violence faced by minorities on religious and political grounds must stop. So what representations are the UK government making at the United Nations over this matter, and are we confident the interim government in Dakar can get a grip of this?
I thank the Honourable Lady from Liverpool Wavertree and commend her for her commitment to the communities in her constituency, and want to emphasise that the visit that we carried out, that I carried out last month, had freedom of religion or belief, protection of minorities and general law and order right at the top of the agenda, and the UK is at hand to support Bangladesh at this difficult time where law and order and stability are at risk.
Sir Desmond.
Clearly, it would have been expedient to have had a special envoy on religious freedom in place. It's all very well her saying that it's under ministerial consideration. What's the problem? Haven't they got anyone committed enough or talented enough to do it?
I'm a big believer in mainstreaming all of these important areas, because sometimes if you have a freedom of religion or belief person, then that lets the minister off the hook. But no, I see it as my responsibility, and my responsibility only as the representative of the UK in Dhaka, to make the case for the Hindu community or any other persecuted minority. I'm not going to wash my hands of it and let somebody else do it. It's being mainstreamed across every single ministerial brief as we speak.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents in Portsmouth North have loved ones and family members in Bangladesh, and like this House are concerned about their safety and security. Does the Minister agree with me that we want to see a peaceful pathway to an inclusive and democratic future for Bangladesh? And, Mr. Speaker, can she give us in this place and Portsmouth North constituents information on how this is being advanced?
Thank the Honourable Lady for her question. First of all, of course, the visit face-to-face with the leadership of the country, but secondly, our ongoing support. The High Commission in Dhaka is very involved with the keeping of law and order, with the advising on anything leading towards the safe holding of elections in sometime in 2025, and indeed in listening to the voices who have been so affected by the violence over July and August, and in specific terms for today's urgent question to the Hindu minority community.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A number of members of the Hindu community in mid-Buckinghamshire have contacted me deeply concerned about the situation in Bangladesh, and I urge the Minister to take every diplomatic step possible to protect Hindus in that country. And in that vein, can I ask her if she believes whether Bangladesh's constitution, which guarantees equal status and equal rights in the practice of religion, does provide for a reliable legal basis through which to domestically prosecute cases of religiously motivated violence?
We stand ready to assist Bangladesh as it goes forward with its difficult roadmap towards elections eventually. And today's question is so important because law and order is crucial at this fragile time. But we are there to be friends, to be supportive, and to provide any legal assistance that we can offer that country as it goes forward.
Gurinder Singh Chausa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister reassure the House on the importance of religion and belief in Bangladesh and across the world in all nations, particularly for minorities? The Minister will appreciate the long-standing and deep ties of the Hindu community in the UK with Hindus in Bangladesh. So can the Minister please detail what engagement she's had with the UK Hindu community on this issue? Does she believe that engagement is important? And indeed with Bangladeshi community in the UK who are also appalled at what's going on?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and of course when I was in Bangladesh I was able to speak specifically about the law and order question and concerns that had been raised in this House with me when we had our engagement event, which was cross-party, and indeed I commit to doing another one of those to explain exactly the content of my discussions while I was in Bangladesh. But could I also respond to his question regarding how I've been learning in the role? And I was delighted to go to the London Borough of Brent and to visit the temple, the Neasden Temple, and to learn about Diwali. And I had an exceptional visit there with the British Asian Trust and learned so much. And that was a prelude to Diwali, a prelude to my wonderful visit then subsequently to India after Bangladesh. And I'm on a wonderful journey. I'm falling in love.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for her commitment to addressing issues of religious freedom and human rights. Over that 16-day period, 2010 people reported incidents on 69 Hindu temples, 157 families were attacked, looted, vandalised, set on fire, and 9 Hindus lost their lives. What steps can the UK take to work with the Bangladeshi government and international partners to promote religious minorities in Bangladesh, ensure accountability for these heinous crimes, and promote the fundamental right to freedom of religion or belief for all? Will the government consider raising these issues at the UN or through direct diplomatic engagement to ensure swift and decisive response? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, there can be no greater champion for freedom of religion or belief than the member for Strangford, who worked so closely with the member for Congleton in the former Parliament. And he quite rightly monitors every single event and details them here. And I will undertake to write back on exactly the instances which he mentions, and also to leave a copy in the library for other members to look at.
Kirsten Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Some of my constituents from the growing Indian community in Winchborough are increasingly concerned about the accounts of horrific acts of violence towards the Hindu community in Bangladesh. Does the Minister agree with me that violence against Hindus or any other religious minorities is entirely unacceptable? And what reassurance can she provide my constituents that the UK Government is supporting all efforts to protect the freedom of religion and belief?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and could I commend her as a new member on her calling for that freedom of religion or belief, or freedom not to have a belief, which is so important to the work that we do in this regard. And could I reassure her that not only was it the top of my agenda when I visited Bangladesh, but also that we continue to monitor any instances of violence, of lack of law and order, and to offer support where we can to the interim government of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this urgent question, and I thank the Minister for her response. The Minister will be aware that a significant number of the Bangladeshi Hindu diaspora in the UK have expressed significant concern around the attacks on the Hindu community in Bangladesh, including those in my own constituency. She may be aware that several Bangladeshi Hindu community organisations within the UK have written to the Foreign Secretary recently requesting a meeting. Could I ask the Minister what efforts she and the Foreign Secretary are going through to engage with the community, and would they be willing to agree a meeting to discuss their concerns and hear what action this government is taking?
I'm very happy to attend a meeting, as I'm sure the Foreign Secretary will be too, and also obviously as part of learning about the brief, I intend to visit a number of different places of worship to emphasise the importance of minority faith groups, and to reassure them that when we're doing our work abroad, not just at home, that we're talking about the importance of the freedom of religion or belief or no belief. Thank you.
Sam Cullen.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Several of my constituents in North West Cambridgeshire have been in touch incredibly concerned about family members that they have in Bangladesh. And those family members are living in extreme fear and have done for some time, but particularly since August. The reports of increasing violence against the Hindu community are disturbing. Can I ask the Minister how the government intends to support human rights in Bangladesh and support the Bangladeshi community in my constituency as they go through this difficult time?
The youngest member of the House for his concern regarding Bangladesh and the minority communities in Bangladesh, and as their Member of Parliament, his constituents can be informed through the meeting that I will hold as the member responsible with the brief, and I will invite all members to it, so that if anybody would like to come with specific examples, we will have desk there and we'll be able to answer any questions which are forthcoming. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
That completes the urgent question. I'm now going to suspend the House for 10 minutes for us all to read. We didn't get unfortunately, we've not had the statement, and quite rightly has been previously acknowledged by the Home Secretary. It's totally unfair to bounce the Chamber into a discussion, but in future we must get it on time.
Let me just apologise, Mr Speaker. I did check that it had been sent at 1:45 to make sure it was in 45 minutes, and if that didn't reach you, then I apologise, because that was the information I was given, so I do pass on apologies.
Not only is the information wrong, we didn't get it till 4 minutes to 3, and I think the opposition can get it to almost 3 o'clock. It's totally unfair, and they need to get the right together. This should not happen. I'm suspending the House for 10 minutes.
Order. For the record, I draw attention of the Treasury Bench and all members to paragraph 9.5 of the latest edition of the Ministerial Code, which states that copies of the text of an oral statement should be made available to the opposition and the Speaker's office at least 45 minutes before the statement is to be made. It is clearly highly regrettable that this did not happen today. I note the Home Secretary's previous apology made shortly before the suspension and now call the Home Secretary to make her statement.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With permission, I'll make a statement on net migration, asylum and border security, and on the collapse in controls that took place over the last 5 years, the damage done as a result, and the action we are now taking to turn that round. Madam Deputy Speaker, last Thursday's official statistics show how over the last 5 years, controls in the immigration and asylum systems crumbled. Legal and illegal migration both substantially increased. The backlog in the asylum system soared, and enforcement of basic rules fell apart. Net migration more than quadrupled in just 4 years to a record high of nearly 1 million people, and it is still more than 3 times higher than in 2019. Dangerous small boat crossings rose from 300 people in 2018 to an average of over 36,000 a year in the last 3 years, a 120-fold increase. And in just a few short years, an entire criminal smuggler industry built around boat crossings has been allowed to take hold along the UK border. The cost of the asylum system has also quadrupled to £4 billion last year. In 2019, there were no asylum hotels. 5 years on, there are more than 200. Returns of those with no right to be here are 30% lower than in 2010. Asylum-related returns are down by 20% compared to 14 years ago. And that is the legacy that we inherited from the previous government, one that former ministers have themselves admitted to be shameful. We should be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, this country has always supported people coming here from abroad to work, to study, or be protected from persecution. That has made us the country we are, from the Windrush generation to the kinder transport, from international medics working in our NHS, to the families we have supported from Ukraine. But that is exactly why the immigration and asylum systems have to be properly controlled and managed, so they support our economy, promote community cohesion with rules properly respected and enforced, and our borders kept strong and secure. None of those things have been happening for the last 5 years, and the scale of failure and loss of control has badly undermined trust in the entire system, and it will take time to turn things round. So let me turn to the changes that are needed in 3 areas. First, on legal migration. Recent years have seen what the ONS calls a large increase in both work-related and study-related immigration following the end of travel restrictions and the introduction of the new immigration system after the UK left the EU. Conservative government reforms in 2021 made it much easier to recruit from abroad, including a 20% wage discount for overseas workers. At the same time, training here in the UK was cut, with 55,000 fewer apprenticeship starts than 5 years ago, and the number of UK residents not working or studying hit a record high of over 8 million. This was an experiment gone badly wrong, built on a careless free market approach, which literally incentivised employers to recruit from abroad rather than train or tackle workforce problems here at home. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is clear that net migration must come down. We're continuing with the visa controls belatedly introduced by the previous government, including the higher salary threshold, the 20% discount and the restrictions on dependent visas for students and care workers. But we must go further to restore order and credibility to the system. Since the election, we've set out new plans to ban rogue employers who breach employment laws from sponsoring overseas workers. We've reversed the previous Conservative decision to remove visa requirements from a number of countries where large numbers of people arriving as visitors were entering the UK asylum system instead, and we're reviewing visas further to prevent misuse.
But we also need to overhaul the dysfunctional UK labour market that we inherited, including bringing together the work of the Migration Advisory Committee, Skills England, DWP, the new Industrial Strategy Council, to identify areas where the economy has become over-reliant on overseas recruitment and where new action will be needed to boost training and support. And that work will be at the heart of our new white paper, showing how net migration must and will come down as we set out new ways to link the points-based system with new requirements for training here in Britain. Let me turn to the asylum system. Last week's figures showed how the previous government crashed the asylum system in the run-up to the election. In their last 6 months in office, asylum decisions dropped by 75% and asylum interviews dropped by over 80%. So only a few hundred decisions were being taken a week instead of thousands. Caseworkers were deployed elsewhere and the backlog shot up. We've had to spend the summer repairing that damage, getting caseworkers back in place, restoring interviews and decisions, and substantially boosting returns. It will take time to deal with the added backlog and pressure on asylum accommodation that this collapse in decision-making caused. But the swift action we took over the summer has prevented thousands more people being placed in asylum hotels, saving hundreds of millions of pounds. So I'm also today publishing the full spending breakdown of the previous government's failed Rwanda partnership. In the 2 years the partnership was in place, just 4 volunteers were sent to Rwanda at a cost of £700 million. That included £290 million paid to the government in Kigali and almost £300 million in staff, IT and legal costs. The result of that massive commitment of time and money was 84,000 people crossed the channel from the day the deal was signed to the day it was scrapped. This so-called deterrent did not result in a single deportation or stop a single boat crossing the channel. For the British taxpayer, it was a grotesque waste of money. Since the election, we swiftly deployed many of the people who were working on fantasy planning for the Rwanda scheme into working onto actual flights instead for those who have no right to stay in the UK, helping to deliver nearly 10,000 returns since the election. Enforced returns are up by 19%. Voluntary returns are up by 14%. Illegal working visits are up approximately 34%, and arrests from those visits are up approximately 25%. And I can tell the House this new programme to tackle exploitation and ensure the rules are enforced will continue and accelerate next year. And then turning to border security. 6 years ago, less than 300 people arrived on dangerous small boats, but since then, an entire criminal industry has taken hold and grown, with routes stretching through France, Germany and beyond, from the Kurdistan region of Iraq to the money markets of Kabul. They profit from undermining border security and putting lives at risk, and it's a disgrace they got away with it for so long. So since the election, we've established the new Border Security Command, announced £150 million over the next 18 months for new technology and intelligence and hundreds of specialist investigators, struck new anti-smuggling action plan agreements with the G7 and bilateral agreements with Italy, Germany, Serbia and Balkan states, and increased UK operations with Europol and the Calais Group. In recent weeks, international collaboration has led to high-profile arrests and shown the smuggling gangs we will not sanction any hiding place from law enforcement. And I can tell the House today we've gone further. With a major new international collaboration, the Iraqi government and Kurdistan regional government share our concerns about the people traffickers operating through their country who have helped transport thousands of people across Europe and across the Channel. But joint action to tackle those problems has previously been far too weak. That's why last week I visited Baghdad and Erbil to sign new cooperation agreements on border security, migration and organised crime. As part of that, we will invest £500,000 helping the Kurdistan region enhance its capabilities on biometrics and security, and training Iraqi border staff to tackle organised immigration crime, with new commitments too on joint operations, information sharing, pursuing prosecution disruptions and further work on returns. These are landmark agreements, the first in the world for this Iraqi government focused on playing its part in the world. Most people in Britain want to see strong border security and a properly controlled and managed migration and asylum system where the rules are respected and enforced. So we do our bit alongside other countries to help those who fled persecution, but where those with no right to be here are swiftly returned, and it is governments, not gangs, who decide who can enter our country. For 5 years, none of those things have happened, and people have understandably lost faith in the entire system. So we have the chance now to turn that round, to fix the chaos, to bring net migration down, to tackle the criminal gangs and prevent dangerous boat crossings, to restore order, control and fair rules properly enforced. Not through gimmicks, but through hard graft and serious international partnerships. I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Phil.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Speaker and you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for ensuring we had the proper time for considering the statement. Now, the Home Secretary seems to have a great deal to say about the last government and rather less to say about her own record since the election. But fortuitously, there was a large release of data last week which gives us an insight into the first 5 months of her time in office. And having looked at that, I can see why she is so silent on her own record. Let me start with small boats. It has been 150 days up to yesterday, since July the 4th, and in that time, a staggering 20,110 people have made the dangerous, illegal and unnecessary crossing. Over 20,000 since this government was elected. That is an 18% increase on the same 150 days last year, and it is a staggering 64% increase on the 150 days immediately prior to the election. Now, why is it that the numbers have gone up so much? Well, let's turn to what the National Crime Agency have said about this. They said last year, no amount of funding or action against people smugglers will end crossing on its own. They went on to say, and I quote, "You need an effective removals deterrence." Now, the Labour government, after it was elected, cancelled that deterrent. They cancelled that Rwanda deterrent before it had even started. The first flight was due to go off on the 24th of July this year, but they cancelled it. And had that flight taken off as planned, we would not have seen the 64% increase that we have seen since the election, exactly as the National Crime Agency foresaw. But it's not just me, it's not just the National Crime Agency. Even Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, has called for European member states to implement an offshore processing scheme, a proposal which 18 European member states are said to support. So my first question is this: will the Home Secretary support and agree with the National Crime Agency and do what Ursula von der Leyen has urged and re-establish the scheme? Because as a consequence of her failure to reduce small boat numbers, the use of asylum hotels, which they promised to end, has gone up by 6,066 in the 3 months following the election. And the asylum backlog, which she had a great deal to say about, has gone up by 11,000 in the 3 months following the general election, something she didn't find time to mention. Now, she did talk a bit about her deal in Iraq. Her deal spends £500,000 with the Iraqi government. Now, that is not a great deal of money. It's what you'd spend probably on a road surfacing scheme in our constituency. And the idea that spending £500,000 is going to stop people smuggling from Iraq, I'm afraid, is naive and fanciful. What might have helped smash the gangs is having life sentences for people smuggling. So perhaps the Home Secretary could explain why in the last Parliament she voted against the bill that contained life sentences for the people smuggling gangs that she says she wants to smash. Now let me turn to the question of legal migration. And there I agree with her. The numbers have been far too high for many decades under successive governments. Now, it is welcome that the numbers for the most recent year have come down by 20%, but that is not far enough, and we need to go further. I do welcome the fact they're going to maintain most of the measures introduced by the last government that has seen that 20% reduction. We have also seen the number of visas go down. Visas, of course, are a leading indicator of migration. Work visas down 28% year on year. Student dependents down 84%. Student visas down 19%. And care visas down 84%, all thanks to measures introduced by the last government. But I would like to know why this government has decided to suspend the planned increase in the dependent visa salary threshold up to $38,700. It was due to take effect in April of next year, but they have suspended it. If they're serious about reducing net migration, as she says, why have they suspended that measure announced by my right honourable friend, the member for Braintree, in December of last year? And if they're really serious about reducing net migration as we are, what we really need is a hard cap on the numbers proposed by the Leader of the Opposition and I last week. So will they follow our suggestion and introduce that hard cap? So, Madam Deputy Speaker, behind all the bluster and all the chat about previous governments, we see her record and her government's record, a 64% increase in small boat crossings since the same period before the election, 6,000 extra people in hotels, the asylum backlog up by 11,000, all since the 4th of July. We see the deterrent, the Rwanda deterrent, which the National Crime Agency and even Ursula von der Leyen says is necessary, cancelled by this government before it even started. So I call on her to think again on those issues, to introduce those measures in April that the previous government announced and introduce this hard cap. If she is serious about combating illegal migration and getting the net legal migration figures down, she will adopt those measures.
Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think if anyone believed that flights were going to go off to Rwanda this summer, the party opposite wouldn't have called the general election when they did. They would have hung on, hoping that it might happen, but it's just been the same thing time and again. They kept promising, they kept saying it was going to happen, but now everybody can see it was a total failure. It ran for over 2 years, and they kept promising the flights were going to go. They never did, but they just spent £700 million instead. They know so much, do they know, that this was a total failure. Their leader, their newly elected leader, won't even promise to reinstate it because she knows the whole thing was a con. And let me remind the Shadow Home Secretary too, the first half of this year, so the last 6 months of his government, crossings hit a record high for that season. If that trend had carried on, if that trend for the first half of the year for the record high had increased, had carried on through the summer, we would have had thousands more crossings that we would have been dealing with. Instead, because we had the increase for people arriving from Vietnam, this government introduced a major charter flight, return flight to Vietnam, and has been working with the Vietnamese government to make sure that those numbers from Vietnam can come down. We've also had to deal with a total collapse in their asylum decision-making that they left us with before the election, which has meant we have had to get caseworkers back in place that they had deployed elsewhere and let the backlog soar. But I would just say the Shadow Home Secretary then sort of wriggles a little bit around the net migration figures that have gone up to this record high, 900,000, because of the new rules that they brought in, that his government brought in 2021. Who was the Immigration Minister who brought in those rules? The Shadow Home Secretary.
Afzal Khan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, at a time of hugely stretched resources across the government, thanks to the mess left in the public finances by the party opposite, I welcome the additional money announced for investment in the Border Security Command and in strengthening our wider intelligence and enforcement capabilities against the smuggling gangs. So does the Home Secretary agree with me that is a far better use of taxpayers' money than paying people to go to Rwanda?
Well, my honourable friend is right. These criminal gangs, if you go back just 6 years, there was barely any of the boat crossings. This criminal infrastructure was not in place along our borders, and what we've seen is it take hold, to be allowed to take hold through several years and to build and to grow. And those gangs are getting away with undermining our border security and putting lives at risk. We should not be allowing them to get away with it, and that is why the cooperation led by the Border Security Command to go after the gangs, to pursue prosecutions and disruption is so vital to save lives and to strengthen our borders.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lisa Smart.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Conservatives trashed our immigration system, and now it's time to pick up the pieces. A period of quiet reflection might be appropriate from some benches for the next couple of minutes. Their chaotic approach of making and breaking targets shattered public trust and left the system in a right shambles. Rwanda, small boats and asylum hotels are phrases that took on new, shameful meanings over the last Conservative government. Net migration figures hit record highs on their watch, skyrocketing, particularly after they took the UK out of the EU. Yet still, the Conservatives' arbitrary rules make it nearly impossible for some sectors to recruit the workers they need, like in hospitality. So it's clear that change is desperately needed. We need to rebuild an immigration system that works for our country and for our economy, a fair, effective system that welcomes the workers we need. And I'm thinking about the really senior surgeon who undertook the kidney transplant that my dad had that kept him alive. That surgeon came here as an immigrant. We also need a system that clearly and properly enforces the rules. We need a system that sees our university sector as a jewel in the crown, welcoming students from overseas and as a way of using the UK's soft power for good. So it's right that the government is taking steps to make it easier to recruit British workers to fill vacancies, and a really thorough workforce strategy is sorely needed. But will the government consider implementing Liberal Democrat calls for a carer's minimum wage to help address the well-documented needs of the social care sector? I'm really pleased the Home Secretary also talked about how we'll have to work closely with our international partners to stop the dangerous channel crossings, something the previous Conservative government made it harder for us to do time and again. International cooperation is crucial, but our response to these criminal gangs, who are profiting from some of the very most vulnerable, must go further too. We need to crack down on modern slavery here in the UK, which is how these gangs make a big chunk of their money. And I hope the government will cut off these gangs' power at the source by providing safe and legal routes for genuine refugees. The government has a mammoth task ahead, rebuilding not only an immigration system that works, but also, really importantly, the public's trust in the process.
Well, I welcome many of the points that the honourable member has made, and she is right to point to the lack of trust and confidence in the system as a result really of the chaos of the last few years, as well as the real loss of controls, the loss of the practical measures in place. She particularly raised the issues around the migration for work. The migration for work quadrupled in the space of 4 or 5 years, at the same time as we had drops in the number of adults in training and also the drops in apprenticeship starts. That is a system that is broken. We do agree that we should have support fair pay agreements in social care and a proper workforce strategy around social care to ensure that we can better recruit and support care workers who are UK resident. We have also already I've asked the Migration Advisory Committee to look particularly at the engineering and IT sectors, because those are sectors where we have had persistently high levels of recruitment from abroad, where we frankly should have had far better and longer standing training here in the UK.
Nadia Whitto.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that the public is right to be angry about the state of public services, and the blame lies squarely with 14 years of cuts and mismanagement by Conservative governments, not migrants who contribute to their new home? And will she stand up to attempts by members on the benches opposite to distract from their own failures and divide the country by scapegoating people who just want a better life for themselves and their families, as we all do?
Well, she's right that the previous government in 14 years did deep damage, not just to our public services, but also to our economy as well. And they have to take responsibility for that. We've also have a history going back through generations where people have come to the UK to work, to study, and to get protection from persecution. But it's because those systems are important, an important part of who we are, that they do also need to be controlled and managed. And that is why a long alongside the damage they have done to our economy and public services, it's also, we have seen the damage to the relationship between the migration system and the labour market, which has also ended up with the loss of control too.
Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. With regards to the agreement with Iraq, I note that the estimated spend is around £800,000, which compares to, I think, £476 million being spent with non-agreement with France. So has the Home Secretary made an estimate of how much she expects this money will contribute to reducing the numbers crossing the Channel?
So what we've found in the discussions with both the Iraqi government and the Kurdistan regional authorities is that they want to tackle organised immigration crime in their country. They are concerned not just about the people trafficking and people smuggling, but also about drug trafficking, and sometimes it'll be the same gangs who are linked to this, and also money laundering. So what we found was actually a strong willingness to work with us, where actually the most important thing will be to get the coordination, the cooperation, information sharing, and the standards and intelligence in place. That will be the first start. This is the beginning of a partnership. So the funding we have set out is for the first step in that partnership to get the better biometrics, the better training capabilities, the better border security working in place. But we see this as being an important partnership that needs to grow.
Lindsay Farnsworth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As an international liaison prosecutor, my job was to facilitate international cooperation, working with the NCA and overseas authorities. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that this is the key to smashing the criminal people smuggling gangs and not gimmicks like the Rwanda scheme?
Yeah. Well, I completely agree. To spend £700 million just sending 4 volunteers, I mean, it's the most astonishing, shocking waste of money. But she's also right that, look, these criminal gangs operate across borders. That is what they do. But law enforcement across borders is far, far too weak. It's been far too much each country looking inwards rather than getting the cooperation in place. And so the gangs are able to run rings round law enforcement far too many places across the world. We have to strengthen that cooperation across borders in order to tackle those gangs.
Father of the House, Edward Lee.
I agree with the Home Secretary that the failure of the last government to control immigration was unconscionable, and our new leaders rightly apologised for our failure, although some of us on the back benches did warn the government at the time, but there we are. That's for the past. For the future, I agree we all want to return illegal migrants and where they come to, but will the Home Secretary list the countries where human rights lawyers say they are so unsafe that we can't return them to those countries? And so what is the deterrent for those countries? We don't have an offshoring policy.
Well, obviously each individual case needs to be decided on a case-by-case basis. But what we do know, for example, for Iraq, there are people who have been, has been agreed through the courts who could be returned to Iraq, safely returned to Iraq, but the process is extremely slow, or the bureaucracy is extremely slow. We also know there are many people who are in the immigration enforcement system currently, but who the previous system, it just wasn't following up and it wasn't taking the action. And that's why we've been able to substantially increase the returns in a short period of time. Of course, each case has to be looked at on its merits, but we do believe we can do substantially more to make sure that the rules are properly respected and enforced.
Dr. Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her statement, and I make my response within the context of my register of interest. And I would also like to thank the Secretary of State for talking about the UK's strong history in welcoming people here who are trying to escape persecution. And we also shouldn't forget that the organised people smuggling into this country, at the heart of it, people are being exploited and also people are dying. And we've seen it in the final days of the last government. They were just sloganising around the people coming in hero boats, and also sloganising about the absolutely shameful Rwanda scheme. It brought shame on our country. And I was absolutely appalled to hear the member on the opposite benches trying to defend that scheme. And I was absolutely shocked as well to hear the fact that the number of students coming to the UK dropping was something to be celebrated. Sorry.
Order. Home Secretary.
Well, clearly, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Rwanda scheme did fail, and the leader of the opposition knows that it failed, and that is why she does not want to reinstate it, contrary to the Shadow Home Secretary's views, who seems to want to spend another $700 million for another 2 years to send another 4 volunteers to Rwanda. The criminals that organise the boats are incredibly dangerous. We've seen children crushed to death. We've seen people drown as a result of these flimsy and dangerous boats, and those gangs are making hundreds of millions of pounds of profit. They're getting away with it. We should not be letting them get away with it. That is why we need to work across borders to go after them.
Tim Farron.
Madam Deputy Speaker, migration does, however, play a significant part in our economy. In the Lake District, 66% of hospitality and tourism businesses report that they are failing to meet capacity, or rather to meet demand, because of lack of workforce capacity. Migration is part of the answer. Would she listen to leaders of the Cumbria hospitality and tourism economy and meet with them to look at how we can look at options like, for example, a youth mobility visa scheme that would give us the ability to shore up our workforce, which is brilliant, but far too small?
Well, all I would say to him is I think there are some deep and fundamental problems in the UK labour market that we have inherited, because he is talking about workforce shortages at a time when net migration has quadrupled, at a time when overseas recruitment for work has quadrupled. And therefore, I think what that shows is there is a much bigger challenge in the workforce, where you've got the huge drop in training, where we don't have proper strategic approaches to the workforce, and that is what we should be putting in place instead. Looking at issues around training, looking at the issues around pay and conditions, looking at the key sectors to make sure that they get support, rather than continually looking to increase migration instead.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The former Conservative Immigration Minister has said the country is right to be furious about his party's record in immigration, and they need to own their failures and change. What is about the Conservatives' obsession with their failed and costly Rwanda programme that shows they've heeded his warning and changed their approach?
Well, my honourable friend is right. I think the former Immigration Minister and Shadow Justice Secretary said the net migration figures were a day of shame for the Conservative Party. They might need a little bit more shame on the front benches.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Home Secretary set out how many hotels have been moved into housing asylum seekers since the 4th of July, and will she commit to updating the House regularly as to which hotels have been repurposed into that use?
Well, I know that the Immigration Minister has already answered, I think, some of the questions he has raised, and he is right to raise concern about asylum hotels. There are now 220 asylum hotels in use. He will know that his government opened 400 asylum hotels, and we have had to deal with the collapse in asylum decision-making. In the last few months before the general election, they went to taking just a few hundred decisions a week, rather than to be taking thousands of decisions each week. That was deeply damaging, and we have had to deal with that so that we can turn things around in order to make sure we clear the asylum backlog and end hotel use.
Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's clear that my right honourable friend inherited a chaotic immigration situation from the last government, and I commend her for the work that she's doing. She rightly focused on international cooperation, but principally around removals. Does she accept that in a world that is so interconnected as ours, migration can no longer adequately be managed by treaties which are now more than 70 years out of date, and that we need to cooperate with our international partners to create a new structure and a new settlement for managing global migration?
Well, my honourable friend makes important points, because I think countries do need to work together and do need to look far more about some of the causes of migration. It's why we set out at the European political community additional £80 million fund to look at earlier prevention work, to look at how we address some of the causes of migration in the first place, as well as the law enforcement response that we need to go after the criminal gangs.
Pete Wishart.
The absurd and chaotic Brexit, fully supported of course by this government front bench, was supposed to finally satisfy this obsession with Brexit, but ending freedom of movement is actually going to increase the numbers of people coming here. What is the point of the Brexit, and why has it so spectacularly failed to manage to get a hold on immigration to the UK?
Well, I think that the previous government, the Conservative government, made a decision in 2021 to launch what was effectively a free market approach to immigration. And they made it much easier to recruit from abroad, and they also introduced incentives for employers to recruit from abroad by introducing a 20% wage discount at the same time as they were cutting training and cutting support as well. So the consequence is we have indeed, since 2021, seen a massive increase in overseas recruitment at the same time as we've seen a drop in people getting the training and support to work in the UK.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the frank assessment that this government has brought to the situation and the setting out of clear measures. As we have heard, criminal gangs are causing untold misery to people all around the world. Can she expand on the measures that we are taking, particularly with European neighbours, to crack down on these criminal gangs once and for all?
Well, we have been working with other European countries. We have a new agreement in place with Italy about going after illicit finance that is underpinning many of the criminal gangs. The work that Prime Minister Maloney has done already has helped to significantly reduce Mediterranean crossings, and we are working with Italy. We do think this work is important. We're also working with Germany on supply chains and with Bulgaria on supply chains, including the way in which boats and engines are being moved across Europe. And of course, we are working with France on tackling the organised gangs, which includes some of the Iraqi Kurdish gangs that are operating in northern France, in order to be able to pursue those gang networks as well to prevent dangerous crossings.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Asylum Hotel in Cheshunt, in my constituency of Broxbourne, is already putting pressure on strained public services, including local GP surgeries. The government's manifesto committed to closing asylum hotels, so can I ask the Secretary of State when she will be honouring that promise, or will that list get longer of broken promises to the British people?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are determined to clear the backlog so that we can end asylum hotels. In 2019, there were no asylum hotels. So the previous government increased those and opened around 400 of them. There are still around 220 asylum hotels in place. We have had to deal with the shocking crashing of the asylum system just before the election, where they effectively stopped a whole lot of caseworkers making decisions on asylum cases and pushed the backlog up. So we've had to clear that now over the summer as well. That means we can then make progress in order to bring that backlog down, so that we can start to clear hotels and to make sure that we save money from the taxpayer, where we have already saved the taxpayer hundreds of millions of pounds this year.
Emma Foodie.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as part of the £700 million spent by the previous government on the failed Rwanda scheme, was the Home Secretary as surprised as me to hear about the package of support that the 4 volunteers that went to Kigali received? That included 5 years of free housing, free food, free private healthcare, free university education, free vocational training, all at a cost of £150,000 per person. Does she agree with me that Rwanda was not in any way a deterrent, but an absolutely colossal waste of money?
Well, my honourable friend is right. This was a total shocking waste of money to just send 4 volunteers
and they had 1,000 people working on the Rwanda scheme. That was 1,000 people who could have been working on enforcement, could have been working on returns, could have been working on clearing the backlog, could have been working on action to pursue the criminal gangs, and instead they were working on a scheme that ran for 2 years and still just sent 4 volunteers.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I agree with the Home Secretary. She's right to highlight that 2023 was a year of shame for a government that had repeatedly promised net migration of tens of thousands a year, not nearly 1 million. Perhaps they'll never be forgiven for it. But if I also look at 2023, I see that asylum claims were 84,000 people. Everyone talks about the small boats, and yet 69% of that 84,000 did not come across the English Channel in boats. Can she tell me, please, where did they come from? Were they overstayers? Were they student visas? Who were the 69%?
From what? Well, we are clear that net migration needs to come down after the huge increase. We also need to restore order to the asylum system. Part of that is going after the criminal gangs who are undermining border security and putting lives at risk and tackling the small boat crossings. But there is also an issue about the increases that we have seen around in-country asylum applications, and we have instigated a review into the increase in in-country asylum applications to get to the bottom of what is happening and why. There were 2 areas where we found that the previous government's decision to remove visa requirements for visitors had led to a significant increase in asylum applications for people who were coming as visitors. Instead, we have reversed those changes that were made by the previous Conservative government and reintroduced visitor visa requirements for those countries.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the chair of the APPG for the Kurdistan region in Iraq, I welcome my right honourable friend's recent visit and the agreements that flowed from that. Does the Home Secretary agree that UK and allies' support for the Kurdistan regional area in Iraq across all spheres, plus the efforts of our own government and allies to strengthen relationships between Baghdad and Erbil, fosters greater prosperity and stability, helps reduce corruption, and thereby helps alleviate some of the push factors that cause migration in the first place to this country?
Oh, my honourable friend makes a very important point. I want to thank the Kurdish regional government for their hospitality and welcome, and also to thank the Iraqi government for their welcome and support for my visit last week. And we had really important and serious discussions with both the regional authorities and the Iraqi government on the range of issues, yes, on tackling organised immigration crime, but also on the positive work that both the Iraqi government and the Kurdish regional government want to do to support economic prosperity, and the point that they make repeatedly, which is security is the foundation of economic growth as well, and that is why they are also so keen to tackle organised immigration crime and other forms of organised crime that can end up undermining their security and their economic opportunities.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Given promises made at the general election, the opening of more asylum hotels is deeply regrettable. As the Home Secretary seeks alternative accommodation to be able to close down those hotels, will she assure the House that she will not overdo her requests of other government departments, in particular the Ministry of Defence, which has historically been very helpful in finding surplus accommodation to house migrants? I hope she agrees enough is enough, and that she will not disadvantage service families in their accommodation needs.
Well, I agree with him about the importance of support for our armed forces, and including housing for armed forces families. That will always be important. All I would say to him around asylum accommodation is the number of asylum decisions had dropped by 70% in the space of just 6 months. That is a massive drop. Of course, what that did was that increased the backlog over the summer as a result of that crashing of asylum decisions. We have now managed to get the asylum decisions right up back to where they were. We have managed now to get the asylum caseworkers back in place and to have those decisions taking place now rapidly. That puts us now in a position to be able to get the backlog down, to be able to make sure that we can take action on asylum hotels, and means we are already saving hundreds of millions of pounds this year compared with the previous government's plans.
Samantha Niblett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the run-up to the summer general election, my constituents in South Derbyshire were hugely concerned about the number of small boats crossing the Channel. And little wonder, because the party opposite left office in the middle of the worst year ever for small boat arrivals. 18% higher than in 2023, 5% higher than in 2022, and more than double the level in 2021. Since the Labour government came into office just under 5 months ago, the number of arrivals is now lower than in 2021, more than a third lower than in 2022, and only 15% higher than 2023, rather than 19% that we inherited. So would the Home Secretary agree that that all sounds like pretty decent progress to me?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that point, because look, she's right. The first 6 months of the year was a record high for that season. Of course, we know that the crossings is seasonal, but it was a record high for that first half of the year. If we had carried on at a record high level, so higher than 2023, higher than 2022, higher than 2021, if we'd carried on higher than each of those years, then we would have thousands more people in the asylum system right now. We would have to deal with thousands more dangerous boat crossings as well. And there were some independent projections when we took office in the middle of the year saying that crossings could have been as many as 50,000 this year. That hasn't happened. That actually, though, is still no real consolation, because so many lives are still being lost and so many gangs are still making huge profits. And that is why we have to take the action on the gangs. We have to strengthen border security and prevent so many lives being put at risk.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Speaker, now effective technology is at the centre of an excellent asylum and immigration system, and I was at the Minister's drop-in in relation to e-visas, which I'm sure many of us welcome. There was reassurances there that those who haven't yet had their e-visa and are transitioned from a paper wouldn't be disadvantaged, but the reports suggesting otherwise that we've seen today, and that's of particular concern to the Afghan community, particularly those who came since the rise of the Taliban. Can I get reassurance that people will not be disadvantaged if they don't have their e-visa processed by the end of January?
Well, the honourable member makes an important point here, and she will know that the Minister is working immensely hard to make sure that any areas where there are concerns are dealt with. We are clear that no one should be disadvantaged by the transfer to this new electronic system, which will strengthen security and will strengthen the information that people rightly have, but we need to make sure that it happens as smoothly as possible. I would urge her to continue to keep in touch with my right honourable friend, so that we can make sure that every single issue within the system and with the transfer to e-visas is properly addressed.
Paul Wall. Deputy Speaker, when the net migration figures were published last week, and they were truly shocking, the Shadow Justice Secretary, the former Immigration Minister, did say on Twitter, now known as X, it was not just a day of shame for the Conservative Party, but it was also a day of shame because they'd let the country down badly and caused immense and lasting harm with its immigration policies that had left Britain poorer. Would the Home Secretary agree with me? It's better to train up our own people in this country than repeat the failed Tory policies that left us all poorer.
Well, my honourable friend is right. We need a complete overhaul of the way that training and support for work takes place to get UK residents back into work, to make sure they can get the training that they need, and we don't have this chaos in the net migration system as well. I think something else that the former Immigration Minister has said is that they will only rebuild trust opposite once they own up to their failures. Perhaps a little bit more owning up that we need to hear today.
Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, in the last Parliament, Labour consistently voted down stricter border laws, and they signed bleeding heart letters trying to prevent the deportation of criminals from this country. And in government, they cancelled restrictions on family routes, and they've removed the offshore processing option. So I confess I am deeply sceptical that Labour will be successful in controlling immigration. Now, the Iraq deal sounds promising as a headline, but truly, what difference will £500,000 to the Iraqi government make in terms of the volume of channel crossings?
Well, I would again sort of say to her that this is about establishing the new cooperation and networks, not just across Europe, but also beyond. We know that there are significant Iraqi Kurdish gang networks that operate in northern France. We know that the Kurdistan regional authorities and the Iraqi government are particularly concerned about this. They're concerned about the routes back into northern Iraq. They are concerned about the impact it is having on their country, as well as the impact that we are concerned about that it is happening in the Channel. That is why at the start of this is getting that law enforcement working in partnership together. And that is what we can now build on. This is the first agreement that Iraq has done with any country around tackling organised immigration, crime and border security. I was really welcome their support for this and their determination and commitment to do this. We need to work in partnership with them on it.
Amanda Martin. Madam Deputy Speaker, residents in Portsmouth North are concerned about the rising cost of housing asylum seekers. Although it's not what we would have wanted as a government, it's good that we have been open and apologetic about having to open on a temporary basis to house these people, because of the lack of inactivity from the previous government. Does the Home Secretary agree that this is firstly in stark contrast to the previous government, who never explained and never apologised, even when there were more than 400 hotels costing £9 million a day? And, Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Home Secretary say when we expect to see the cost of housing asylum seekers reduce?
Well, we are already saving hundreds of millions of pounds this year from the asylum accommodation budget as the result of the decisions that we have already taken to restart asylum decision-making and to get the system working again so that we can start clearing the backlog. Had we not done so, had we carried on with the previous government's policies, we would have seen those costs soar further. That is unfair on the British taxpayer, as well as the sign of a broken asylum system. We will continue to do that. We expect to make hundreds of millions of pounds more savings next year. In total, the assessment is that over the next few years we are saving £4 billion from the previous government's failed schemes.
Desmond Swain.
What deterrent will she implement for those asylum claimants who have destroyed their papers and purport to come from regimes to which they cannot possibly be returned?
Well, one of the reasons that we are talking to the Iraqi government and the Kurdistan regional authorities about biometrics and supporting biometric rollouts, because that makes it easier then to prevent people delaying either asylum claims being resolved or returns being agreed by not having papers. And where there are biometrics in place, that makes things much faster. And that is why we should be working to extend those, and why we are also working to establish stronger returns arrangements with other countries, which is what we have been doing through the summer, and why we have seen such a substantial increase in returns this summer as a result of us putting the additional resources that were failing to achieve anything on the Rwanda scheme, now actually putting them into doing practical things as part of returns and enforcement.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In his statement, the Shadow Home Secretary said that £500,000 wasn't a lot of money. And that's probably because he thought that for £100,000 more, you could give free education, housing, university education, vocational training to just 4 volunteers to go to Rwanda. What an absolute waste of money. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that it is a far better deterrent to actually process people and send them abroad? Or should we continue with the fallacy that we should be bribing people as a nation to send them over to Rwanda?
Well, he's certainly right that the £700 million for 4 people is absolutely not good value for money at all, and we will always make sure that we are looking for good value for money as well as getting results.
Sammy Wilson.
Mr. Speaker.
The previous administration cannot Pontius Pilate-like wash its hands of the immigration mess that we have, and which has placed intolerable burdens on mostly disadvantaged working-class communities. But the government now has responsibility for this. It can't pass it back again. The government has responsibility. And what I would like to hear from the Minister today is that despite what has happened since July, 20,000 more immigrants coming into the United Kingdom, hotel places up, foreign criminals still waltzing through the courts claiming human rights to stop themselves being removed. What does she intend to do to remove the pull factor which encourages people to see Britain as an easy touch?
Well, I would say to him one of the things that we are doing is cracking down on the illegal working and exploitation by employers of people coming to the UK who are often not here lawfully and as a result are being exploited by employers. That has been too easy for employers to do that for far too long. That is why we've had more than 30% increase in illegal working visits over the summer and significant increase in the arrests as a result of those visits, and also a significant increase in penalties for employers as a result of that. And we will continue to take much stronger action, including also making sure that we are removing the sponsorship ability for any employer that is breaching the important employment laws as well, because we do need to make sure that every bit of the system is being tackled and being addressed so that we make sure that we have a system that is fair and has public support.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary ended her statement saying that she wanted serious international partnerships, but when pushed on this by the Shadow Home Secretary, she seemed reticent to say whether she would explore removal or processing agreements with third countries, as advocated for by the President of the European Commission. So who is actually serious on this question, this government or Ursula von der Leyen?
Home Secretary. Well, we have been very clear about the importance of working with other countries, both on tackling gangs and also on addressing some of the wider issues that we face. That's why we've always said we would look at anything that works, we will look at practical measures. It's why we've recognised there are different approaches being taken by different countries. For example, there is the Italy-Albania agreement that has been put in place. And interestingly, one of the things that does is introduce effectively, the idea is to have a fast-track returns arrangement for those from predominantly safe countries to be able to be moved to Albania. We think it's possible to also introduce fast-track arrangements that have never properly been in place in this country for a very long time, and we should be looking at those as well.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over 210,000 Ukrainians have been hosted in the UK since Russia's full-scale invasion, and this is a testament to the generosity of British hosts. But the millions of Ukrainians who have left Ukraine for Europe is just a fraction of those who might flee across Europe if Russia was successful at breaking through and occupying all of Ukraine. Does the Secretary of State see it as in the UK's own national interest that we confiscate all of Russia's frozen assets and offer the proceeds to the defence of Ukraine and prevent further displacement?
Well, as the Honourable Member will know, we strongly support Ukraine in what they have had to endure and to go through, and we continue to support Ukraine. We continue to condemn the Russian government and the Putin government for the things that they have done and the impact that they are having on Ukraine, and we will continue to support Ukraine in every way possible.
Lincoln John.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A constituent wrote to me recently asking if I could get a hurry-up on his application under the EU settlement scheme. Turns out that he's actually subject to a deportation order. And we actually did deport him in 2018. He managed to get back into the country somehow and make his application under the EU SS. And the Home Office told me last week that they can't deport him until his application under the EU SS has been played out, including all the appeals. So he made his application in 2020. It's now nearly the end of 2024. In the spirit of bipartisanship, can I suggest that the Home Secretary changes the rules with the stroke of her pen, and that anyone who is subject to a deportation order just gets deported? And in the similar spirit, if she can get it done by Friday, I'll gladly drive him to the airport myself.
Well, what I would say to the honourable member is they've obviously had 14 years, or at least 4 years, since the EU settlement scheme was introduced. So they have had time, supposedly, for the previous government to be able to deal with some of these issues. But we actually do take very seriously the need to better speed up and enforce returns for those who have no right to be here. The immigration system and the asylum system can only really work and have public confidence if the rules are respected and the rules are enforced. So that means where someone doesn't have a right to be here, there should be proper enforcement. So we are working to speed up the enforcement. That is why we've had the significant increase in returns over the summer, but we will continue to do so, and we will continue to look at what further amendments can be made to improve things.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary has quite rightly lambasted the absolute failures of the last government of mass immigration. But could she comment on whether or not people in the Home Office will be held accountable for allowing systems and controls to crumble in the last 5 years, and whether people will be held accountable in the Office for National Statistics that got their numbers wrong by almost 250,000 people in just 1 year?
Well, I think it was government ministers opposite who made the policy decisions that they then asked Home Office officials to implement. So fundamentally, the Conservative government does need to take responsibility for policy decisions that they made in 2021 that led to the big increase in migration for work, for example, and the big increase in the net migration numbers that we saw at the same time as training was being cut in the UK. That has had, I think, damaging consequences in terms of confidence, in terms of trust, but also actually in the functioning of the UK economy and the UK labour market, because we should be doing far more to train people, everything from engineering, construction, a whole series of different areas. We should be increasing training here in the UK.
Blake Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the Home Secretary confirm how many country deals are being worked on to ensure people can be returned to their country of origin, and when she would expect these to have a material impact on the level of migration to the UK?
Well, the work we are doing with different countries, some of it is actually just about speeding up existing returns arrangements, which sometimes don't work effectively enough. Sometimes it will be relatively practical improvements in existing arrangements that just take far too long or have too many hurdles in them. So we are already doing that, and that is why we have had the significant increase in returns over the summer. It's why we've also organised a series of charter flights, including the 3 largest charter return flights in UK history have been all organised since the general election as part of the practical work we are doing step by step to increase enforcement and returns.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst we're reassured by the previous answers to questions that the Home Secretary is committed to increasing processing of asylum claims to clear through the backlog, Liberal Democrats will push you to go further and faster. Will you consider calls from the Liberal Democrats to end the ban on asylum seekers working, reduce the time limit to 3 months so they're able to contribute to their cost of living, integrate into societies and start to pay a fair share within the communities that they wish to join?
No, I don't think that is the right thing to do, because I think what we need to do is to clear the backlog, to speed up the decision making and ensure that those who don't have a right to be here are swiftly returned. Where we've had people arrive, for example, from Ukraine or from Hong Kong, of course we want to see them working, being part of the economy and being able to support themselves and their families. But where somebody is here who doesn't have a right to be here, then I think the important thing is to make the system work and make sure they can swiftly return.
Jack Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Villages like Datchet in my constituency are bearing the brunt of the increase in 6,000 illegal economic migrants in asylum hotels since this government came to office. Given these single adult males represent something like 2% of the village population, what assessment has she made on the extra pressures on vital local services, particularly GPs and dentists? And what assurances can she give my constituents that they won't miss out on vital appointments as a result of this sudden demographic change?
Well, we think that the asylum hotels are the wrong way to be responding to the system that we have, and that's why the increase in the backlog as a result of the previous Conservative government's collapse in decision making has been so damaging. And that is why we have now got the additional caseworkers back in place, why we have got asylum decisions now being taken and back up to the levels that they were, so that we can clear the backlog and so that we make sure we don't need to use these asylum hotels, which have, to have the previous government opened 400 asylum hotels and quadrupled the cost of the asylum accommodation system. That is a shocking, shocking impact on the taxpayer, and we are already saving money from bringing those costs down.
Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We need a firm but fair and compassionate approach on immigration. I think we would all agree in this House. Human rights NGOs have warned that people returned to Iraq could be at risk of human rights abuses. So could the Home Secretary tell us what reassurances she's had on that point? And will human rights always be a red line when she is striking migration deals in future?
So the agreement that we reached with and signed with the Iraqi government explicitly commits to support for international law, for international humanitarian law and human rights, and it's one of the issues that we discussed as part of the meetings as well. You will also know that in terms of the asylum system, every decision is made on its individual merits to make sure that where somebody is being rejected for the asylum system and is being returned, that it is safe and appropriate to do so. But we do believe that there are many people currently in the immigration enforcement system who should be safely returned to their homes. That's why we have increased the process around enforcement and returns this summer.
To end, we have Jim Shannon.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure that's a thrill for everybody. Can I just say to the Secretary of State, thank you so much for your statement. And whilst the failures of the previous government may undoubtedly be a reason for this uncontrollable migration number, my constituents in Northern Ireland who have had their winter fuel allowance removed, who are seeing an increase in the cost of living that is pushing many working families towards the poverty line at warp speed, these people, my constituents, are not interested in a blame game, but they are interested in getting immigration sorted and the boat stopped. So will the Secretary of State say what the government will do to achieve a reasonable immigration policy? And how will they deal with those who have not come here legally and who do not deserve to be here in front of the families of Afghanistan who were instrumental in the war effort there and are still waiting in the correct procedural queue rather than jumping off boats?
So, in response to the point that the Honourable Member makes, the enforced returns for those with no right to be here are up 19% this summer. Voluntary returns are up 14% because we do think those should increase. In terms of the overall immigration system, we will also be setting out in a white paper new proposals to better link the Migration Advisory Committee, the skills bodies across the UK and other organisations to identify stronger controls but also linked to stronger training requirements. So as well as having the visa controls in place, we also have clear requirements to train here in the UK to make sure that we can tackle that big increase in net migration for work that we saw over the last 5 years. I think he would probably agree. Most people across the country, they want to see strong border security and they want to see a properly controlled and managed immigration and asylum system. We haven't had that for too long, but those are the proper controls and fair systems that we need to get back in place so we fix the foundations and everybody can have confidence in the system for the future.
That is the end of that statement. I'll give the front benches a few moments to quickly and quietly shuffle over. Northwest Syria. Minister Faulkner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, we witnessed a major new offensive by opposition groups in northwest Syria. On Wednesday, the 27th of November, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, along with several other opposition forces, started to move towards Aleppo. By late Friday night, they were in control of the majority of Aleppo city. They had also captured Sarakeb, which intersects Syria's most strategic motorways. As I stand here, we do not know if HTS will succeed in pushing further south towards the city of Hama, which sits approximately 100 kilometres south of Aleppo. What we do know is that these developments mark the biggest shake-up of the conflict lines in Syria since 2020. In response, Russian airstrikes have increased on Idlib province, HTS's heartland, and on Aleppo, and there have been reports of Iranian-aligned groups moving into Syria to back up the Assad regime. Events are moving quickly, and the trajectory is unclear. My primary concern in the immediate term is the impact on civilians, and of course, delivery of humanitarian assistance. This is particularly worrying, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we see more large-scale attacks by the regime or Russia against civilians. I call directly this evening on all actors involved, including Iran and Russia, to act in accordance with international humanitarian law and not to target civilians or civilian infrastructure, including health facilities. Humanitarian actors should be granted full humanitarian access on the ground. In response to recent developments, we have been rapidly engaging key partners and interlocutors to assess the situation and coordinate responses. I spoke earlier to my Turkish counterparts, where I reiterated my concern about the potential for new escalation and the impact on civilians. I will be travelling to the region this weekend, where I plan to engage a range of partners on the latest developments, and I'll be speaking to the UK-funded Syrian organisation, the White Helmets, on Wednesday, who operate in northwest Syria, to better understand how they and other non-governmental organisations are responding to the situation and supporting people on the ground. The UK issued two statements over the weekend, Madam Deputy Speaker, one with the US, Germany and France, calling for de-escalation and the protection of civilians to prevent further displacement and disruption of humanitarian access. This is the right focus as the situation develops. But the current fighting also underscores that the situation in Syria is not sustainable. 13 years into the conflict, no side has or can decisively win on the battlefield, including Assad. A frozen conflict is not the same as peace. Syrians continue to flee the country. Drugs and arms smuggling from Syria threaten the region, and Iran and Russia continue to exert influence, propping up the Syrian regime. The underlying reasons for this conflict remain unaddressed. Recent developments in northwest only underscore the urgent need for Syrian-led political solution to the conflict in Syria, in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. We urge all parties to re-engage with this process and the efforts of the UN Special Envoy Pedersen. I recognise this escalation also raises other questions, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, on consular assistance, I should make clear the long-standing advice from my department is against all travel to Syria due to the ongoing conflict and unpredictable security conditions. Consular support is not available within Syria. All British embassy services in Damascus are suspended. I reiterate our long-standing advice. Any British nationals in Syria should leave the country by any practical means. On the wider humanitarian situation, we are closely monitoring. In northwest Syria, 4.1 million people, 80% of whom are women and children, were already in need prior to this escalation. Currently, there is no humanitarian corridor established for those fleeing, increasing terribly the risks to their safety. Since 2011, the UK has spent over £4 billion, our largest ever response to a single humanitarian crisis. In October, we announced a further £3 million to provide life-saving emergency assistance and healthcare to the most vulnerable citizens fleeing from the Lebanon conflict into Syria. Many of those will be in northwest Syria. Too many Syrians have tragically been displaced as a result of conflict multiple times over. They bear the brunt of horrific violence. Sadly, more still will be displaced by this latest escalation. And I underline my concern at what we might see should Russia or the Assad regime start a campaign of bombardment on the area. The UK has stood by Syrians. We will continue to do so. Our assistance aims to improve humanitarian conditions for those in the direst need. We work with local and international NGOs, UN organisations, and we provide health, nutrition, child protection, water, sanitation and education services throughout Syria, including in the northwest. As the situation develops, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're working closely with humanitarian actors on the ground to understand the impact and the needs the latest escalation creates. We call on all parties to ensure full and unhindered humanitarian access throughout the affected areas and to protect civilians. For too long, the Syria conflict has been considered frozen. But if we've learned one thing in recent years, it's that there is no such thing. It is incumbent upon us to use this moment to find new momentum for the political track, to address the underlying causes of this conflict, and I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement. These developments in Syria are deeply serious and threaten the further brutality and terror in a region under enormous pressure and suffering. We see an extremist rebel group making rapid progress, taking territory in Aleppo, and Russian airstrikes in Aleppo for the first time since 2016. We know there's been fighting in Idlib and Hama too. Civilian lives continue to be lost and homes destroyed. Now, as the Minister says, it's over a decade of turmoil in Syria and tragedy for the innocent people of Syria, which is beyond disturbing. With the eyes of the world focused on other conflicts, we cannot forget the brutality, the loss of life and destruction that has taken place in Syria and the consequences that it has. More than 500,000 people have already been killed, millions injured and maimed, and some victims to chemical weapons. How many more innocent lives must be sacrificed for a savage dictator's thirst for power or at the whims of bloodthirsty terrorists? Madam Deputy Speaker, the civil war in Syria was one of the most harrowing issues I've had to deal with when in government. And honourable and right honourable members who have been in this House since 2011 will know of the way this conflict has disrupted the region and contributed to the global migration crisis, including some of the debates that we've had. And I recall the fear, the concern and trauma experienced by Syrians that I've met, and I know others in this House have met, in countries such as Jordan and in Lebanon. Both countries are under a great deal of pressure, and Lebanon in particular right now, but also how their lives have been turned upside down by the conflict. And those at the time were caught in the burn between Jordan and Syria and some of the terrible atrocities that they were facing. The calculated and cruel barbarism of the Assad regime and the brutality of the terrorist groups has been horrifying at every single stage of this conflict. They've held our belief in tolerance and in freedom in contempt, and we should never turn a blind eye. Now, I've been very clear in the past that when red lines are crossed in this conflict, the UK must be part of a firm response. And we are once again in a dangerous place, and it could become even more severe. So I've seen the statements that were issued by the government and our partners, America and Germany and France, over the weekend. So I hope the Minister can answer some of my questions, as we need really an honest assessment of this conflict. Can the Minister tell us his assessment of the real threat that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham poses to our interests? And in his statement, the Minister has commented on the drugs and arms smuggling through Syria, which has been known for some time, and our dear friends and allies in Jordan have been raising this issue. Can he tell us what action he plans to take with international and neighbouring allies to address this? With further instability and conflict in Syria, there is also a risk of proliferation of criminal activities. Instability also fuels extremism, not just abroad, but at home here too. Can he therefore explain his view on the risk of dangerous extremists in Syria and the risk to the security of prisons in the area? And can the Minister confirmed that coordination is taking place across our government to review the security and defence implications and terrorism risks. The House will know that the UK has been at the vanguard of the humanitarian response, and we should all be proud of that, and the £4 billion that the previous government has invested and the support that has reached millions of people. And we've saved lives with food, shelter, water, medicines, vaccinations and improved sanitation. So can the Minister explain what the government will do to ensure that aid gets into the hands of the right people and not the wrong people? I remember the day when we saw an aid convoy blown up and aid was disrupted and there was no humanitarian corridor. And what is he doing to leverage our aid budget to respond to these new and recent developments? Can the Minister also tell us whether or not aid is getting through into the areas that are now affected by the current surge in violence, and how this new escalation could impact upon some of the migratory pressures that we know of within the country and what that means for the neighbouring areas? Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that the Assad regime has been bailed out by the Russians and Iranians, including Hezbollah. But with Russia now focused on its illegal invasion of Ukraine and Iran's presence in the region now depleted, how does the Minister assess this will affect the dynamics in the current insurgency? And finally, does the Minister have a vision for what future we should now be discussing with regard to Syria and how we can get there?
Minister Faulkner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Right Honourable Lady for the questions. There was a lot there, and I'll endeavour to get through as much of it as I can. The Right Honourable Lady asked me what regional coordination is underway. We are talking with all of the regional capitals, as you would expect. We do not, let me be clear at this stage, who we do not talk to. We do not talk to HTS. They are a prescribed terrorist organisation, and they are prescribed for a reason. They remain prescribed, and we are concerned by many of the public statements that they have made. We are not talking to the Assad regime. The Right Honourable Lady paints well the horrors that Assad and his regime have perpetrated across Syria, but we are talking to all of those with an interest. As I say, I will travel to the weekend this region and do further consultations, and I'm talking to the NGOs and other actors on the ground. In response to her question about whether or not access is sufficient, as she will have seen, the front lines are moving very quickly, and we are concerned that practical access for aid agencies will be very difficult to maintain. We are working with our partners to try and maintain it, to establish humanitarian corridors and ensure that a population already at great risk will be provided with the assistance that they need. But in a moment of such quick changes, that is difficult, and we are working day and night to ensure it. The Right Honourable Lady asks about cross-government coordination. We are very alive to the terrorist threats that could emanate from Syria, not least from Daesh, who may be down, but they are not out, and we continue to monitor those issues very closely, including the status of prisons, as she referred to. On the dynamics in the region, which the Right Honourable Lady referred to, clearly the region is in very significant flux. The position of Iran and Russia is in flux, and that is why I call on them this evening so clearly that they must not conduct the large-scale attacks on civilians, which I fear are their go-to in such a situation.
I've got the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. During the Syrian civil war, millions of Syrians moved to Turkey, others moved to southern Lebanon, and so they have already been displaced once. In Turkey, Erdogan has been encouraging them to go home, back to Syria, and in southern Lebanon, they, of course, have had to move back into Syria again to flee from the invasion. Multiple traumas of multiple families, innocent families that have no guilt in any of this but are simply the victims again and again. When families face these multiple traumas, what assistance is the British government able to give them?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The truth about the circumstances in northwest Syria are it is incredibly difficult to provide appropriate and sustained care for, as my right honourable friend says, many people have been displaced not even necessarily by this conflict, but by the Lebanon conflict, which we've discussed in this House recently. The truth is, people being displaced on multiple occasions are in a situation of acute vulnerability, and whether it is those who have been displaced by the Lebanon conflict or by the conflict in northwest Syria, we are extremely concerned. We will do what we can. The assessments are ongoing.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. I join members on all sides of this House in expressing deep concern at the toll of this latest outbreak of conflict upon the innocent civilians of Syria. For it's Syrians who have borne the brunt of more than a decade of horrific conflict, nor should we forget the devastating impact of the 2023 earthquake in parts of the country too. So may I offer my support to the Government in urging all parties to uphold international law. It's vital that the Government does all that it can to prevent a deterioration of the humanitarian situation both in Syria and in the region more broadly. I spoke this afternoon with the Jordanian ambassador to the UK. He underscored the potential impact of this conflict on his country with its long, porous border with Syria. With an estimated 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon and another 1.3 million in Jordan, providing necessary support to neighbouring countries who host these refugees is, of course, crucial. Yet, thanks to the successive cuts to the international development budget, including by this new government, too often we approach crises such as this with one hand tied behind our back. Will the Minister set out what new development assistance we are providing in response, and whether he is seeking additional emergency funds from the Treasury? It appears that this fighting reflects interference in Syria by both Iran and Russia, as the Minister has said, each seeking to serve their interests during a period of instability. There is a very real risk that this new conflict in the northwest of the country may create a vacuum in the south of Syria that allows terrorist groups like al-Nusra, al-Qaeda and Daesh to re-establish. Does the Minister share this concern? The UK must hold others to account and press for an end to the use of proxies who show no regard for the rights of civilian populations nor the rule of international law. Can the Minister say how the UK is using its influence in international organisations and with our allies to achieve this?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are conducting rapid assessments about where the needs will be in a situation which is rapidly changing. We announced further funding, as I mentioned, for northwest Syria in October, and it's not yet clear what further allocations will be required, and I'll update the House at the time that those assessments are complete and our plans are clearer. On counter-terrorism, yes, I agree with the honourable member that there is, as I mentioned in my response, there remains an extant threat from Daesh, from Syria and indeed other groups, and we will continue to monitor those issues very closely. Our first responsibility to the government is the safety of British nationals, and that will continue to be the case, and we take our responsibility seriously.
Chair of the International Development Select Committee, Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I actually can't process that this conflict has been going on for 13 years. And on this side of the benches, I have a direct sightline to our former colleague from Batley and Spen, who, when she came here, did so much to draw this House's attention to the plight of civilians. And things have only got worse since then. It's already the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, with nearly 17 million people in need of humanitarian assistance and 90% of families living in conflict, living in poverty. So I asked the Minister, what assessment has he made of the impact of this most recent escalation on the levels of need for both those in Syria and those that have fled? Will the UK urge the UN to activate its emergency response plans? And the bottom line, is the government prepared to increase ODA on humanitarian support?
Minister.
So I thank the my honourable friend for the question. So we are talking to the United Nations about their plans. I won't give undue comment on operational matters, but there are the United Nations system is under strain in northwest Syria, as you would expect, and in the coming days I hope to be able to say more about what assessment we have made and what actions we will take on the question of whether or not there will be any increase in ODA. That would be, I think, a question more properly for Minister Dodds. She is in the region now, and I am conscious that across the Middle East we have very significant needs which we are trying to do our best to meet as best we can.
For Middle East Minister Dr Andrew Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Assad and his family have reportedly gone to Moscow, which is probably significant. Let us hope he stays there. They deserve each other. But HTS is very much worse. And as HTS takes territory, people will be on the move in very large numbers. Historically, the United Nations have managed the situation in northern Syria and triage those who are claiming asylum, and this country has been generous in taking particularly from the most disadvantaged groups, old people, women and children. What discussion has the Minister had with the United Nations, and will that process continue? Because I feel sure that the British people will want to continue to be generous.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable member raises an important point, I think, particularly in relation to minority groups. I want to use this opportunity to once again underline to all parties to this conflict, whether they are prescribed in the UK or not, that minority groups across North Syria, of which there are many, deserve to be protected. They have a right to exist, and we are looking closely at the actions of all conflict parties, regardless of whether or not we have direct contact with them, and it is incredibly important that minority rights in northern Syria are protected. On the member's question about the United Nations, to be frank, there is at this moment panicked movement across front lines, and it's probably too early to be able to address the kinds of questions that the honourable member raises, but we will be, I'm sure, talking about this in due course.
Blair McDougall.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my mind also turned to the former member for Batley and Spain, my friend Joe, and the cry to do something to help the people of Syria that she made in this chamber. Back then, we saw the widespread use of chemical weapons in the last moment when Assad's regime was under pressure. I wonder what steps his government is taking to monitor any war crimes taking place in this moment. And I wonder if he'll also, by way of deterrence in this moment, reaffirm that the British government still believes that there should be accountability for the use of chemical weapons a decade ago in Syria.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to recognise both the work, obviously, of the former member for Batley, our friend Joe Cox, but also the honourable member himself, who has been involved in these issues, including of accountability for some time. I agree with the honourable member. Of course, there must be accountability for the use of chemical weapons by Syria. I have met as a minister with the OPCW to ensure that proper measures are in place and to assist them in their efforts to ensure that treaty conventions are upheld. And I also, in August 2024, instructed UK officials to join an expert-level working group convening a geographically diverse group of states, academics and technical experts to explore international legal mechanisms that could pursue individual criminal responsibility for chemical weapons use. So I call on all parties in northwest Syria at the moment to be mindful that we are watching questions of chemical weapons use incredibly carefully.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Syrian Democratic Forces have been an incredibly important ally to the United Kingdom and so many other countries in terms of pursuing and degrading Islamic State over a long period of time. Can the Minister assure the House that we'll continue to give them as much support as possible, including humanitarian support, to sort of establish and continue the stability that has been in northeast Syria as a result of their work?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. The Syrian Democratic Forces are a member of the global coalition against Daesh. They play an important role. We engage with them regularly, both the SDF themselves and the Democratic Autonomous Administration of North and North East Syria, and will continue to do so.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the Minister's statement and particularly the emphasis on protecting civilians, and I associate myself with the remarks of the Honourable Member for Rotherham and East Renfrewshire in paying tribute To Jo, I'm convinced that if she was still with us, British policy on Syria would have been markedly better than it has been, unfortunately, over the last few years. One of the things that has been a particular concern to me over that time has been that often debates in this chamber and beyond have been done very much without Syrian voices. And so I was very much grateful to hear that the Minister is going to meet with the White Helmets. The International Development Committee are going to do the same as well, which is fantastic. But would the Minister also agree to meet with me and the Syrian British Consortium, a group of Syrian activists in the UK, to discuss our policy towards Syria and how they can have their voices shape the debate going forward?
Minister.
Yes.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to build on the question that was posed by the Right Honourable Member for South West Wiltshire. Between 2014 and 2020, the Syrian people who were given asylum in the UK almost all applied from the region. The Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme did not require Syrians to make it to the UK before applying. By contrast, the small numbers who were successful through that scheme had to apply through Syria's neighbours, such as Jordan. Does the Minister recognise that this safe and legal route encouraged asylum seekers to apply from the region, but it also deterred them from making their way across Europe to the UK?
Sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not sure I followed the question. Am I supposed to... Well, perhaps the member can have another go.
The Vulnerable Persons Resettlement...
Well, the best thing would be to ask for it to be in writing so you could respond efficiently. And I've done it on your behalf, Minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Calvin Bailey.
I thank the Minister for... I would try and repeat the question, but I didn't catch it myself. I'd like to make clear that we, or at least, Madam Deputy Speaker, the hope that we recognise how interconnected the conflicts in the region are, including the connections to Russia, Iran, Israel, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, and even further afield. This escalation creates serious risks not only for the population of the immediate area but to regional stability, and I'd ask my right honourable friend how we can recognise this in our security and diplomatic policy and understand what measures the government's taking to look at these as a collective series of risks which are increasingly interconnected.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is right. The security situation in the region is interlinked. Clearly, what is happening in Lebanon, what is happening in Iran, and indeed what is happening in Moscow, as the honourable member mentioned, is having an effect in northwest Syria. I am concerned by reports of militia groups reinforcing the Syrian regime from Iraq. I am concerned by reports of Hezbollah's actions in Syria as well. So I'd like to assure the honourable member that we take a regional approach to these issues. I'm the Minister responsible for all of these areas, and we do view them all in the round.
Stephen Gethings' question will no doubt be very clear.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and hopefully I'll be clear in my question. Can I concur with the Minister in terms of his reflection on the devastating humanitarian consequences over the past 13 years? On the question of the interconnectivity of conflicts, he mentioned the Russian attacks, which he'll agree with me are very similar in nature to those that we've seen elsewhere in terms of targeting civilian infrastructure. And as such, can you tell me what discussions he's had with European partners in particular, given the lack of reliance we may soon have on the United States when it comes to a common approach on any political process, targeting disinformation such as that rightly highlighted in terms of the White Helmets, and also a humanitarian response to international agencies as well?
Minister.
Thank you. We issued a statement jointly with the French and the Germans over the weekend. We remain in close coordination both on humanitarian matters and also on the importance, as I think the honourable member was alluding to, of ensuring that the Russians understand that there is a common European position and that we are appalled by the kind of targeting of civilians that we have seen, Madam Deputy Speaker, in northwest Syria and in so many other places by Moscow.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I spoke today to a contact in the moderate Syrian opposition
and would be very grateful for my honourable friend's view of his assessment that the Assad regime appears weak without its allies' backing, that many malign actors have noticed that events in Aleppo indicate greater regime fragility than imagined, that problems will continue while the regime persists, and of course, although recent events are somewhat unexpected, could my honourable friend expand on how the British government, working with allies, can foster much-needed democratic transition for the Syrian people?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend's work on issues in the region over many years. We are calling for a resolution of this conflict in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. It is vital that there is a political resolution. Assad's regime has been demonstrated on this day, as on many other days over the last 13 years, not to be the answer. It is not a sustainable position for the Syrians, and so we call on all parties to re-engage with the political process in line with the Security Council resolution.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once again, we find the people of Syria squeezed between two vicious regimes, whether it's the Assad regime or the terrorists, and we know from what has happened in the past that they will be subject to the barrel bombs again, to the finding themselves cowering in basements and basic medical facilities denied them, etc., and will be fleeing. Given what we know from the past and know the kind of routes that people are likely to take, are we preempting it by looking at where bases and camps might be set up? And more importantly, given the fact that minorities were persecuted in those camps in the past, have we put in place arrangements to safeguard them, and as has been suggested earlier, to have a means of assessing asylum claims in those camps rather than forcing people to flee across Europe and then hoping to get asylum once they reach the coast?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the front lines move in northwest Syria, it is hard to work out where vulnerable people will settle. We are worried that this latest round of conflict will drive further displacement and that displacement will head towards Europe. The Home Secretary before me talked a little about some of the measures that she is taking in order to make sure that those movements towards Europe are done in the most managed possible way. I share the honourable member's concern about the benighted people of Syria, in particular the benighted people of northwest Syria, under the most extreme pressures, and we are undertaking rapid assessments about how best we may assist them.
Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement. It appears to be a completely intractable situation, but I do wish you well on your trip. As my honourable friend from Leighton in Wanstead made clear, Iran has its fingers on many of the conflicts and tensions right across the region, and I'm sure all of us stand in complete solidarity with the ordinary Iranian people. But can we conclude that sanctions aren't working?
Madam Speaker, I apologise to my honourable friend if I'm talking about the wrong sanctions. Let me talk about two sets of sanctions. Firstly, the sanctions on Syria. We have extant sanctions on Syria. I was in this House to amend them recently to ensure that they do not unduly press on humanitarian agencies. So let me take this opportunity to say that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that our own sanction regime, vital and important as it is to signal and indeed take real action against the Assad regime, is sufficiently flexible to enable humanitarian work. And in relation to sanctions on Iran, I think they continue to play an important role in responding to Iran's malign actions across the region and here in Syria as well.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his statement and answers today? Madam Deputy Speaker, the scenario is one in which we are looking at the lesser of two evils in Syria, and I don't have enough information to gauge which of those it may possibly be. However, my concern, as it always should be and is, what steps can this government reasonably take to secure food and water for the 4 million women and children, and to provide freedom, as there's a necessity to be, from sexual abuse and depravity? And what can we collectively do in this House to do more than we are currently doing to help those who are very much in need? Thank you so much.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I regret to tell the honourable member that it's more than two evils that the Syrian people have to choose between. There are a multiplicity of actors in the region, and that multiplicity makes humanitarian access at the moment particularly complex. We are focused on ensuring that there are both routes for humanitarian aid into northwest Syria, and that was one of the topics of my discussion with my Turkish equivalent earlier today, and we're also keen to ensure that there are humanitarian routes out as well for those who might be affected, including the minorities who I know are so very much more on the mind of the honourable member and all of the members of this House.
Final question, Dr. Ubahak.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Families like those of my constituent Wahiba of Acton, who are a Christian minority, find themselves now facing both jihadist terrorists and Russian airstrikes, and they fled to Aleppo 10 years ago from their original city, Takbar, from ISIS. So she wonders, for those with blood ties here, could there be some kind of Ukrainian-style resettlement scheme, possibly?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in these early days of the conflict, we're focused on events in Syria, but I'm happy to write to my honourable friend with details about what else we might do.
That is the end of that statement. If everyone can just continue in their seats for the moment on the front bench. I call Samuel Wilson on a point of order in connection with the Code of Conduct to rectify a failure to declare.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to apologise to the House for my failure to declare an interest when tabling a parliamentary question to the Secretary of State for Business and Trade on the 26th of January 2024. When I tabled the question, I inadvertently neglected to declare my interest in the fact of a fact-finding trip to the Turkish Republic of North Cyprus, paid for by the Turkish Chamber of Commerce, which was in breach of the rules. I apologise to the House for this error, and I'm grateful to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards for his time and care in rectifying this matter.
I thank the honourable member for his point of order. There will be no further points of order on this issue.
Point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Point of order, Dr. Luke Evans.
I'm grateful for the Chair for giving me this point of order. I'd like to seek the assistance of the Speaker's office. On the 29th of November, Friday just gone, I received an email from the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Agency regarding the honey trap situation that had hit Westminster. In that email, unfortunately, several other victims were named. This was then leaked to the journalists and has been released from that point. I've received a phone call and an email from the Met to apologise. However, I'd be grateful if the Speaker would raise this up as a significant issue with the Met to make sure that lessons are learned and this doesn't happen again.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving us notice of his point of order. As he knows, we do not discuss security matters in the Chamber, but I share the honourable member's concern, and I can assure him that Mr. Speaker will be raising it with the appropriate people. Now, before we go on to the main business, I have a statement to make on behalf of Mr. Speaker. Before we begin, I wish to make a short statement about the House's sub judice resolution. I understand that the Court of Appeal has recently handed down a judgment on 3 cases relating to motor finances. Since the lenders involved have sought permission to appeal these cases to the Supreme Court, they remain sub judice. Mr. Speaker is exercising his discretion to allow reference to these cases now and in future proceedings when necessary, as they concern a matter of national importance. I'll give the front bench a few moments to swap over before we begin the business of the day.